Hello, everyone. And yeah, first I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity to have this discussion with the aspiring architects of our country. So, before I actually move on to my presentation, I would just like to share a quick story from my own life. That is, how I ended up taking architecture as a profession or as one of my favorite careers of choice. So, since childhood, I have always enjoyed playing with Lego blocks, that is, these plastic building blocks that we get. And since childhood, the thing I used to be the most happiest to receive as a birthday gift were these plastic building blocks. So, that is where my love for architecture, that is mainly the development of form, buildings, and things that human beings use as spaces to be in, that is where my love for this profession started. But somewhere down the line, in eighth grade, I started to develop a keen interest towards science, especially physics and more namely astrophysics, that is mainly dealing with space. So then I started to get a bit confused and I started my preparation for JEE Advanced and NAME. And I was a bit confused between taking up pure science and architecture. But a time came in class 12, I still remember that day. That day, I was wondering for myself, do I really want to leave architecture behind for taking up pure science? And from within, the answer was a resounding no. For that was my love and passion for architecture. So, architecture, as senior architect Nihya ma'am has pointed out, and also sir has pointed out, architecture is a profession driven by passion. It is a profession driven by creativity. So, architecture welcomes all with a creative, open, and passionate mind willing to learn. So, moving on with the session about the preparation strategies. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, yes, it is visible.
Okay. So, yeah. So, what are the preparation tips and strategies? These are a few strategies and tips. This is not the only strategies and tips I would say. This is a few strategies and tips I have developed from my personal real life experience, and I would definitely like to share with all of you. But a disclaimer, everyone has their own method of preparing for the exam. So, this is not a holy Bible or it is not a, a golden rule for preparation. So, moving on. Yeah. So first of all, where can JE2 exactly get you? Well, there's a slight confusion when it comes to architecture, especially because unlike engineering exams, which is more standardized and has a fixed exam of JE mains and JE advanced, architecture is a bit more all over the place. So we have JE main paper two, as sir mentioned, which is mainly going to get you a direct admission into the BR programs like NITs, SPAs, and other CFTIs, that is centrally funded technical institutes. Often, some states create their own separate ranking systems, like the example of Karnataka itself. Based on the JE2 and NATA marks, they publish the ranks for the state itself, and all the private colleges in that state give the admission based on this. However, there are also some colleges, generally private, as sir mentioned, like CEPT, wherein you would have to apply personally based on your JE or NATA 2 scores, or they may have their own individual entrance exams. So, what is exactly the pattern of JE2? I think I can skip over this because it has already been mentioned in clearly. So, yeah, coming to the preparation tips for mathematics. Well, I know mathematics is perhaps one of the most hated subjects because, yes, it is definitely not the easiest out there, to put it mildly. So, one of the main things for math is practice, practice, and practice. When I still remember when I was in class 11, I had just started my JE coaching, and the first chapter that we were learning was trigonometry. So I still remember I was trying to solve one question. I was trying to solve it for like close to like 40 to 50 minutes, and yet I was unable to solve it. And I felt really, really bad. But then eventually I spoke to my teachers, and they all told me that it does take time initially. Initially, you may feel that you're really, really slow. You are unable to solve anything that's given at you. How are you going to crack the exam? Well, that is all pressure. Do not worry. With time, you would get better. So then another obvious thing is solve the past year question papers, because often a lot of questions appear with similar patterns, and even though they don't form, like even if they don't occur as it is in the exam, they are a very useful practice tool because they are from the same syllabus. So how to practice smart? Well, this is really important. It is just not about sitting for 16 hours a day and practicing. It is about practicing smartly. So initially, as I mentioned, your questions would take 35 to 40 minutes, but do not get discouraged. Continue. Do not worry. Eventually, it would reduce to 50 to 30 minutes. Continue to speed up. Once you have reached a stage of knowledge, of knowing a certain chapter or knowing a certain topic, you can just skim through the questions. Like often several questions are just repeated. So once you have got to that certain level of knowing about that particular topic, you would just be able to read the question and maybe just think in your mind what are the steps you would be using to solve it. Just the steps. That is, I would use this formula and then I would proceed. If you're able to do it that way, you needn't sit and solve that question. At that stage, you have to start solving questions that do not seem easy, that are really difficult, and you are not able to think of the procedure just by looking at it. And then before the exam, solve a lot of mock question papers, set your own time limits. So these are some textbooks that are often recommended, and some of them even I have referred myself. Well, one very common misconception is the NCRT textbook is not at all useful. It is only the JEE preparation manuals that are useful. But I would beg to differ, especially from a JEE mains point of view, especially for the mathematics part of it. NCRT Exemplar, that is one of the publications by the CBSE, I think, sorry, by the NCRT itself. It is one of the best starter books for you to start off with JEE, because NCRT mathematics textbook obviously has your basic theory, but then NCRT Exemplar has objective questions in a very similar pattern to the JEE mathematics that is going to occur. So you guys must definitely consider looking at NCRT Exemplar. Do not ignore this. Then yeah, of course, Arihant publication, JEE Main and Advanced series. This is slightly of a higher level, I would say. Then previous year solved question papers without a doubt, and also the NATA JEE preparation books by Ignite itself. So yeah, preparation tips for aptitude test. So as I mentioned, math is one of the most important components of your paper. It is going to influence your rank to a huge extent, because math is the main differentiator in JEE Main paper 2 especially. Because math here is at the same level as JEE Main paper 1, and often people are doing paper 2 are unable to give that to a really good level. So math ends up being one of the main differentiators in your rank. So moving on to the aptitude test, this is generally supposed to be a more scoring part of the test, as questions are mainly theoretical and they are often knowledge based. That is, by simple observation, one would be able to answer the same. They are more of a general knowledge type of questions. So for this, mainly using preparation modules for theory is more than sufficient, and a lot of questions are often repeated and paraphrased. So I actually did do my coaching under Jigisha ma'am. So yeah, so she did definitely help me out with this part. So then comes preparation tips for the drawing test. Yeah, so often what happens is the main difficulty in JEE is a lot of questions, at least one question is generally related to perspective drawing. That is real life scene. That is how you would actually see it in real life. You're expected to do the same thing on the sheet. So for that, one of the most important concepts is that of perspective. Several of us have not learned this prior, so we can definitely learn it. It is pretty simple concept. We just need to understand how things look, and with repeated practice we would definitely get better. So it is important to mainly look up at 1 point and 2 point perspectives, 3 point perspectives to a lesser extent, but yeah, that too can be considered. So for this, one of the best ways is to actually look up tutorial videos on YouTube. There are several wonderful tutorial YouTube videos that can be referred to, and they do explain the entire concept. That is, often perspective drawing, to put it simply, it has a lot of concept of construction lines. That is, rather than just drawing something freehand on the paper, you would make a sort of grid in a very particular manner, and then decide how to actually put in your things. So that grid is actually going to be one of the bases of your drawing. So how to actually make that base grid, that is what these videos will teach you, and with practice you would definitely get much better. So yeah, points to keep in mind. These are often not heeded to, and this creates a bit of difficulty in the drawing test. One is that practice drawing without a ruler, because often at times examinations don't allow their use. It depends on center to center. Somehow my NATA center had allowed the ruler, but if I'm not mistaken, my JEE Main paper 2 center didn't allow the use of a ruler. So it is better you don't be reliant on a ruler. You get the hang of drawing straight lines without a ruler. Because at times it is very questionable whether they're going to allow you to take the ruler in or not to the examination hall. Then another thing is stroke practice. So one would think that from day one, okay, fine, I should make a complete, perfect Picasso artwork. Well, that is not true. You first need to start at the basics. Just like how we cannot form sentences and paragraphs without knowing the alphabets. Similarly, even in drawing, your alphabets of drawing are strokes, that is mainly lines that we use to create the drawing. So it is important that stroke practice is done. We have to master the art of making freehand parallel lines. That is, maybe take an A4 size sheet, just draw repeatedly a set of lines and try to make them as much parallel as possible to each other and as close as possible to each other. So you can draw horizontal lines, you can draw vertical lines, you can draw diagonal lines. You can keep doing this practice for a few days till you start to see that your sheet is looking more or less well composed. That is, the lines are more or less parallel and they are not deviating too much. Then you can move on to practicing with vary lines. That is, repeatedly drawing vary lines that are parallel to each other. So once you actually get the hang of this, you can actually move to the actual drawing part of it. So never forget, stroke practice is the basis of everything. Then another thing is perspective concepts that, as I mentioned earlier, can be very well understood by practice and from the YouTube tutorials. Then another thing is abstracting human figures. So yeah, often what happens is several of the questions, as the eminent speakers mentioned earlier, they are often around drawing real life scenes, like what would be the scene on a Diwali night, or maybe an interior scene of a dining table in a house or a kid's bedroom or something like that. So often these scenes look underworked and they look dead without actually adding the human component to it. Because often, whenever we show scenes, the first thing, let's say I'm talking about Diwali scene. So when people are celebrating Diwali, the first thing you would expect people to be doing is bursting firecrackers. So I need to get comfortable with actually drawing human beings. But I would agree. I used to loathe drawing human beings. I used to be really bad at it, and until I actually started to practice and realized that for such drawings we needn't draw the human beings to a very perfection. Like here, the main importance is the surroundings. That is, how is your entire perspective working? Is it looking fine? Is it looking like a 3D scene? They are not they're not focusing mainly on how your human beings actually look. So it is important that you learn to draw human beings, but these need to be simple human beings. Like by abstraction, I basically mean that they should not be an actual human being, maybe just an indication that a human being is here, a very simple, quick way to draw a human being. This too, you can refer to several YouTube tutorials. There are a lot of videos available online. Then, yeah, important is color concepts. This is also something several of us may not know about from our school days itself. So, color concepts, well, basically, why it's important that we would see ahead. So, I would skip over this part for now. Then, also composition with 3D and 2D shapes that will be understood in greater depth ahead. Then comes interior space idea. So, often at times, as I mentioned earlier, realistic scenes like a Diwali scene or maybe a festival scene. Such scenes, it is understood, okay, what am I actually supposed to draw? But at times, questions also appear wherein they say, draw a small girl's bedroom or maybe draw a kitchen of a house. So, for that, it is better if you have prior exposure. That is, you look up photos online of how are good kids' bedrooms look. That is, what do they generally place? Is it a soft toy they place, or is it a sort of curtain? And generally, if it is in the curtain, what type of curtain do they use? Similarly, even for buildings. So if you look up previous examples and also previous examples of what students have drawn, you would be able to understand this to a better extent. Then also a lot of more simpler questions, I would say, on patterns and symmetry. This is something that's inherent to human beings. So this should not be an issue at all. Yeah. So one of the main questions that generally always comes in JMA in paper 2 is about compositions. And that can either be a composition with 2D shapes and a composition with 3D shapes. Well, I'm pretty sure all of you are now wondering what is a composition. Well, to put it simply, as it is shown in the images right here, what is it? It is essentially they have used simple shapes. Like I can see a triangle here, and then I can see some other sort of shape over it. I can see a circle. So a composition is a way of using a mixture of different shapes. Often they may give restrictions on the shape. They may say you're only supposed to use triangles, circles, and pentagons. But at times they may leave it open-ended. So it depends from a case-to-case basis. So based on this, you are supposed to make a very simplistic drawing. So now you guys would be wondering, what is there in this? Like, how do I know that this composition is going to look better than that? Like, how do I even judge? Like, what is telling me that this composition is perhaps better than the composition on the right? How do I know that? So for that, three things matter mainly. The first is your color choice. So as I mentioned earlier, color choice is extremely important. Based on the type of colors I put, it can convey different meanings. So I will take an example. Let us say you're making a composition in which you're mainly using red. So what does red stand for? Generally, in especially in India, in the Indian context at least, red stands for danger. That is, it is a warning sign. So maybe if you put an excessive of red in your composition, it may give people the feeling of danger. But let's say on the same time, I make some sort of wavy shape and I color it blue. So what can that represent? When people see it, you may say it's a river because a river is wavy, a river is blue in color. It can also be an ocean wave. So your color choice is going to be really important. Also, you may want to use sort of contrasting colors, like you may use a complete white background and you may suddenly put a huge circle of red. So then what would happen? When I have a complete white background and a huge red circle in the middle, I am going to see the red circle first. That means I'm drawing the eye towards the red circle. So this is how color can influence a composition to a great extent. So one can look up several videos about color theory online, very simplistic videos about what are the different types of color schemes. There are several color schemes like analogous, complementary color schemes. This is basically just an orientation for you guys, so you guys can build upon this further. Then another thing is symmetry and balance. So as you can see here in this artwork, the artwork, my eyes is not getting drawn towards a very particular corner of the artwork. It seems to be balanced. Like I'm able to see everything almost equally. I'm able to see the blue part behind. I'm able to see the gray part. Also, the shape is drawing. No part of that certain composition is calling my attention. Please see me. No, that's not happening. So that is what is called as balance. So it is important that your compositions must be balanced. That is, you may make a very beautiful composition, but let's say I put a huge red circle in the center. Everyone is going to end up seeing that. Let's say I put very light blues all around and a huge red circle in the center. Everyone is going to see that. So that may be what you want, but that may also not be what you want. It depends. Then another thing comes is contrast and variety. So as you can see in this image itself, there is variety in the background. They have just not given a plain gray background. What is adding interest to this background is the essence of that blue thing, of the blue background cutting across the entire sheet, and that is what is adding the beauty to that composition. So then coming to 3D composition, these are just some examples, and this is why 3D drawing is really important, especially how to shape, because as you can see, the very notion that okay, this is perhaps a pyramid is because this shape has been shaded in a lighter color and this shape has been shaded in a darker color. So when a human brain sees it, the human brain is able to automatically decipher that, okay, fine, this is a three-dimensional object. So shading is really important to 3D compositions. So at times now, JEE Main paper 2, they say they give the option between a 3D or a 2D composition, or they say that, or they restrict you to either one. So it depends on your luck and whichever you're convenient with. So yeah, I don't know if I made this clear earlier. A 2D composition is mainly using shapes. A 3D composition is mainly using 3D objects. So as you can see here, they mainly used a pyramid, they've used a cube, they've used a sphere, they've used a cylinder. They have used some sort of cube with some sort of cutouts and also some other cutouts here. So what matters in this? Here also symmetry and balance matters. So if you see this composition, we have a central cylinder. Like in this composition, everything arises from the central cylinder. Like we have this plate coming out, we have the sphere coming out. So the central cylinder is the main tying element of the entire composition. So that is important. Also contrast and variety. There is variety in this composition. We mainly have curved things at the bottom end, that is like a cylinder, a plate, a sphere, but we also have a very pointy pyramid on the top. So that is adding a lot of variety in the 3D composition. Also, then comes harmony and stability. So as I mentioned earlier, no particular form, that is no particular object, and this is drawing my attention. Everything seems to be well balanced. So this you would eventually understand with practice what makes a good composition and what makes not a great composition. I'll just tell you a pro tip that I did. This happened in my NATA paper. Somehow by luck, I had actually made a composition prior while I was practicing one of the mock papers at my home. And somehow by luck, they gave the same constraints of shapes. Like they told the exact same shapes, you can use these shapes. So I was actually lucky in a way that I could do the same composition there in the exam. I didn't actually have to sit and think about a composition again. So you too could actually make a few compositions prior hand, maybe get them checked by people who actually know about what is a good composition, and maybe like just go to the exam. If you're lucky enough, you may just have to end up drawing the same thing. Then comes patterns, patterns and symmetry. This is something that's really inherent to human beings, and it should not be a big of an issue. Yeah, then comes real life scenes, as the eminent speaker showed earlier. They did show several examples of few of the drawings. These are another few drawings that I could obtain. So yeah, a very important note here. When we talk about real life scenes, it is not only what you're actually going to encounter in real life. Like see here, this is a scene of maybe a barber shop. This is a scene of maybe someone peeping through the eye hole of your house. But also at times, this generally doesn't happen in JEE Main Paper 2. Mostly it happens in NATA, but occasionally they do it in JEE Main Paper 2. They do give very fairy tale type of scenarios. Like what I mean by fairy tale type of scenarios, like they would say, assume you're a shrunk person, assume you're a miniature ant sized person and you're sitting in a pencil box. Draw the scene of a pencil box. So you have to actually imagine yourself sitting in a pencil box, actually imagine the huge box around you, the huge pencil, the huge sharpener. You have to basically imagine yourself as an ant. So it is important that you don't only practice what you're going to encounter as a human being, but also think about what you may encounter when you have a shrunk person, that is maybe as an ant, or maybe as a worm, or maybe as a bird. So these are often a bit challenging questions they give. Generally, they don't appear in JEE Main Paper 2, but I would personally recommend that you practice at least 1 or 2 questions like this prior to going to the exam. So here's an example of that. Here the prompt was perhaps, imagine you have an ant in a shaving kit. So as you can see, or maybe a beauty products kit, whatever you would like to call it. So as you can see, there's a comb, there is these tweezers, there's a lot of cosmetic products, there's a nail cutter, there's a filer. So it is important that you also think about it from this angle too. Yeah, so I think that's all I have from my end.
Ignite, the most leading coaching center for NATA exams in Kerala. Ignite Your Mind, an IIT alumni initiative. Visit us at ignitethrissur.in. Contact 0487 2323 766.